Today the philosophy of time is divided between A-theorists and B-theorists. The difference between the two theories is often described as a dispute about temporal passage or becoming and progressing. B-theorists argue that this notion is purely psychological. The A-theorists argue that in rejecting temporal becoming, B-theorists reject time's most vital and distinctive characteristic. This metaphysical dispute can be traced back to the ancient Greek philosophers Heraclitus and Parmenides. Parmenides thought that reality is timeless and unchanging. Heraclitus, in contrast, believed that the world is a process of ceaseless change, of continuous flux and decay. Reality for Heraclitus is dynamic and continuously changing. Indeed, the world is so fleeting, according to Heraclitus, that it is impossible to step twice into the same river. The metaphysical issues that continue in both theories concern the reality of the past, the reality of the future, and the status of the present moment. To have Heraclitus' dynamic process forming the continuum of time, the present perspective of the individual, what has been called the moment of now, has to have a defining intrinsic property. Because of the advances in physics, it is now possible to go beyond philosophy and have an understanding of time based solely on physics. In Einstein's theory of relativity, there is a concept of an observer that is at a geometric point in both space and time, at the apex of a light cone, which observes the events laid out in time as well as space. This analysis contains the paradox because the concept of an observer is a geometrical point, even though any real observer would need to be the extended contents of an observation to exist. This paradox is partially resolved in relativity theory by defining a frame of reference to encompass the measuring instruments used by an observer. Some of the difficulties and paradoxes can be resolved if we think of the universe as a continuum made up of an infinite number of reference frames that are continuously coming in and out of existence. We all have our own personal view of the universe from the center of our frame of reference, being able to look back in time in all directions at the beauty of the stars. Therefore, we are all in the moment of now, in the center of our own reference frame, seeing time as a measure of changing spatial relationships among objects. Thus, observers need not be extended in time to exist and to be aware, but they rather exist as an integral part of the process of change itself. The internal relationships within the observer can be measured by stable countable events and is physically seen as the aging process over a period of time. But this leaves the great unanswered question: what is the physical process that forms the continuum of time? What dynamic process forms Heraclitus' ceaseless change of flux and decay? There are important aspects to time that give us clues to what this process might be. The future is always uncertain and unfolding relative to the atoms of the periodic table. Therefore, to find the process that forms the concept of a period of time, we need to find something that interacts with the atoms of the periodic table. There is no flow of time in the subatomic world within the atoms. The proton, neutron and quarks within the atom have no concept of time, and in many ways the atoms act like standing weights within the continuum of time. Therefore, we need to find something that interacts with the electron cloud of probability that surrounds the atoms. In this theory, that something is the light photon. We have a future unfolding with each new photon-electron coupling or dipole moment, with the movement of positive and negative charge and continuous flow of electromagnetic fields. This is an artist theory on the physics of time as a physical process and is explained here by the artist himself in his own words.
In this theory, what we see and feel as time is formed by a process of continuous energy exchange, formed by the spontaneous absorption and emission of light. Because it is impossible to achieve absolute zero, everything is radiating light photon energy continuously. We have a process of continuous creation, with time as an emergent property, with the future coming into existence, photon by photon, relative to the position and the energy and momentum or actions of the atoms within each individual reference frame. We see and feel this process from the center of our own reference frame as the continuum of time, and we are an interactive part of this process, with the wave-particle duality of light acting like the bits or zeros and ones of a computer, forming a blank canvas that we can interact with, turning the possible into the actual. If we think of chemistry as a bridge between quantum mechanics and the biology and the reality of everyday life, then if quantum mechanics does indeed represent the physics of time, then it should give us a deeper and more intuitive understanding of chemistry. Also, chemistry will be a good way to explain how the probability of the submicroscopic world of quantum mechanics can represent the same uncertainty we have with any future event. This will be done using the physics and chemistry we already have, only the interpretation will change. The easiest way to see how this process works in our everyday life is to look how oxygen and hydrogen atoms bond together to form the characteristics of water. We have oxygen and hydrogen forming standing waves over a period of time in the form of water molecules. In this theory, the atoms do not just form standing waves over a period of time, but they form their own future relative to their energy and momentum. The water molecules will do this by continuously forming and breaking hydrogen bonds relative to the flow of the water. The molecules of water are continuously moving in relation to each other, and the hydrogen bonds are continuously breaking and reforming. This process forms dipole moments with the separation of charge, with the absorption and emission of photon energy. In this theory, this represents the future coming into existence within the reference frame of the water, relative to the energy and momentum of the water molecules. This process also fits in with observations. If you decrease the temperature, there will be less photon energy for the breaking of hydrogen bonds that allow the movement of the atoms as a liquid. Therefore, if the decrease in temperature continues, there will be a change in state from liquid to a solid in the form of ice. Note, the atoms still form their own future relative to their position, in this case the decreasing temperature, and this can be seen in the individuality and diversity of snowflake formation. There are no two patterns of snowflakes the same in the world. This diversity is formed by subtle changes in photon energy that in this theory represents part of a process of continuous creation at the quantum level of the atoms. This diversity is possible because we have a process of spherical symmetry forming and breaking that even with only two types of atoms, of hydrogen and oxygen, can form an infinity of possibilities that we see as snowflake diversity. This process of symmetry forming and breaking can also be seen in the chemical reaction known as the BZ reaction. That is a spontaneous self-organizing activity, forming patterns of concentric rings. The cause can be very tiny, just light or photon energy can create this process of spontaneous symmetry forming. If you break this symmetry by putting a hot wire into it, you will form rotating spirals. But to create broken symmetry, there has to be a process of symmetry forming to start with. This video will put forward the idea that this symmetry can be explained by quantum mechanics in the form of symmetry not just in space, but also in the form of time symmetry. To understand this, we will start with the periodic table of elements and the main principles of this theory. The periodic table of elements is the cornerstone of modern chemistry, but in many ways it is based on the paradoxes of quantum mechanics. In a new theory, the paradoxes of quantum mechanics can be explained, giving us a deeper understanding of why we have a periodic table of elements. This theory is based on just two simple postulates. The first is that the quantum wave-particle function, or probability function, represents the forward passage of time itself, photon by photon. The second is that Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, that is formed by the probability function, is the same uncertainty we have with any future event. This process of continuous change, or energy exchange, we see and feel as the flow of time itself, that we can interact with, turning the possible into the actual. This process is totally universal and interactive, from the largest object to the smallest creature, right down to the smallest element of the periodic table, will slow the rate that time flows, forming a curvature of space-time relative to its own energy or mass. In this theory, the elements of the periodic table are standing waves over a period of time. Time is continuously being formed by the spontaneous absorption and emission of light waves of electromagnetic radiation. This forms a universal process of spherical symmetry forming and breaking that forms the spiral patterns we see in our everyday life, with each element of the periodic table having a set position, forming the curvature of these spirals. With hydrogen at the center, and the noble gases and different groups of elements radiating out like spokes from the center of a wheel. In the traditional periodic table, there is a problem of where to place hydrogen and helium. They can be placed on the left-hand side because of their electron configuration, or they can be placed on the right-hand side. But by placing hydrogen in the center of a spiral, we solve this problem. Also, by having a periodic spiral, we place the groups of elements that can undergo ionic bonding together on either side of the noble gases. We have had many different types of periodic table in the past. In 1865, the English chemist John Newlands formed a periodic table where the elements with similar physical and chemical properties reoccurred at intervals of 8, which he likened to the octaves of Western and Indian music. This became known as the law of the octaves, but it only worked up to the element calcium. Newly discovered elements further down the periodic table would not fit into the octave structure. This theory can explain a reason for this. It is because the spiral symmetry is formed out of the broken symmetry of a sphere, and as we go down the periodic table, the spiral symmetry becomes more broken and the elements become less stable. Only in 3 dimensions can we see the true beauty and wave-like nature of the periodic table. Each wave forms a period with elements that have similar properties, having a similar position within each wave. The different elements represent standing waves over a period of time. The atoms of the different elements can bond together in an infinite number of combinations and interactions, forming our everyday world. This is not a static process, but a dynamic process, with light waves of electromagnetic radiation continuously interacting with the atoms, with the future coming into existence with each new photon-electron coupling. Matter, in the form of electron waves of probability, is being created into particles when a light wave comes in contact with them, forming a photon-electron coupling. This represents the moment of now in that reference frame, with time symmetry between matter and antimatter, with the antimatter representing the past. In this theory, matter-antimatter annihilation forms part of a process of continuous creation, with the future coming into existence, photon by photon, within an infinite number of dynamic reference frames. This idea of the atoms of different elements bonding together by sharing electrons and then interacting with the wave-particle duality of light in unison, creating their own future, can give us an intuitive picture of modern chemistry. We have one universal process of spherical symmetry forming and breaking at the sub-microscopic world of quantum mechanics. The structure of modern chemistry are formed out of this process that the microscopic world of living organisms is then based upon. Cell life would then be based on this physical process between light or electromagnetic waves and the electrons of atoms. This physical process would look like intelligent design and give life a mathematical base that could be explained by physics. In this way, the probability of quantum mechanics, known as Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, can be seen as the same uncertainty we would have with any future event that we can interact with from the center of our own reference frame, turning the possible into the actual. Therefore, carbon-based life is able to create its own future relative to its actions. In this theory, creation is truly in the hand and eye of the beholder. This is only logical if gravity is part of this universal process, with the outward momentum of light forming the inward force of gravity. This might sound far-fetched, but it can be seen mathematically with both the gravitational force and the electromagnetic force sharing the inverse square law, representing the dynamic geometry of this one universal process. In this theory, we have one three-dimensional universe of continuous creation, with the future unfolding relative to the eye and hand of the beholder. Mass is a byproduct of time dilation. When time slows down, it takes more effort to move an object from A to B, and this is seen as an increase in mass. Also, Einstein's equivalence principle between gravity and acceleration falls out of this theory. Because energy and momentum have to increase for an object to accelerate, time dilation will increase relative to the acceleration. Therefore, we have the equivalence principle between gravity and acceleration. This will be felt as inertia in the direction of the acceleration. Therefore, we have Isaac Newton's first law of motion. Unless acted upon by a net unbalanced force, an object will maintain a constant velocity. This theory takes the dynamic interactive process of the general theory of relativity and extends it to our everyday life, explaining a universe that is continuously coming into existence relative to the energy and momentum of our own actions. Every individual is a part of this interactive process that forms the uncertainty and probability that is needed for the great game of life. But above all, this theory gives us an objective understanding of time as a process of continuous creation, with a potential future that we can interact with from the center of our own reference frame, turning the possible into the actual. This can be in the form of art and poetry. Therefore, even a dancer on the dance floor will interact with this process, forming their own future space-time relative to their energy and momentum of their own actions. In this theory, creation is truly in the hand and eye of the beholder. I have tried to make this theory as simple as possible, in the belief that everyone should be able to understand it. In my other videos I explain this theory in much greater detail. As an artist, I am outside the scientific community, so any help you can give in promoting this theory will be gratefully welcomed. Thanks for watching. Please rate and subscribe. It will help in the promotion of this theory.